What's up, y'all? We are back for another episode of the Sales Bro Pod. This time, we've got Mr. Andrew Strom. Is that how you pronounce it? Last name?
Strohm. Yeah.
Strom.
Strohm comes out Strom. It's German. I don't know.
All right. Otherwise, maybe formerly known as Sales Dad. Are you still Sales Dad?
Dude, you know what? People keep asking me why I switched that. I'll have to switch it back because Sales Dad was catchy and everybody loved it. So it'll probably go
Yeah.
back this afternoon at this point.
Cool. So you guys, if you're on Twitter, which if you're seeing this, you probably are. You probably know who this guy is. He's kind of been around here for a long time, sharing the sales game. Much longer than I've been. So pleasure having you, Andy. I know you've seen a lot of stuff, and hopefully we get some valuable insights for the audience today. But I guess starting from the beginning, just to kind of give people some context, can you share like what you're doing right now today, and then we'll take it back and then we'll add it all up, see how you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. So today I am working with entrepreneurs, solopreneurs. We're talking about online coaches, agencies, offer owners, if you will, to help them improve their ability to close deals, to find leads and close them. That's going really well. Most people on here probably have heard of a bunch of my clients. Don't want to name drop too much, but the Default Kings are some guys that are popular dudes. Save Your Sons, Harrison's one of my clients, and now partner in some ventures. So,
Cool.
a lot of people that you've seen around, I've worked with, and then I'm also working with small to mid-sized companies, training sales teams to optimize what they do to get a percentage of improvement and see an increase in profitability. So
Gotcha.
that is what I'm doing now.
Yeah. How long have you been doing that for now? Like the high ticket
Yeah,
coaching?
I've worked for myself doing the coaching and consulting side for probably 3 years now. So I was working at Geico and wanted to get out. I started a gym, so that was my first kind of major business move, which I still own. It's great. And then I realized that wasn't kind of operating my strength, and stepped out into the next venture, which was the coaching and consulting. Like I said, about 3 years ago.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So it's I think a lot of people that are going to be listening to this are not going to be as uh I guess you could say like experienced. Like they haven't been in it as long as you. So I think
Yeah.
showing people the progression of, okay, this is where I was, this is how I got where I am, is going to be super cool. And so for anyone listening, this is our first time officially meeting, but I've heard a podcast, some of this stuff that we're going to dive into. So I'm super excited. So going back, the gym was not the starting point. The starting point was
No.
the corporate stuff, right?
Yeah. So just to give you kind of a really quick backstory, man, growing up, I never had any idea what I want to do with my life. Like just total blank. Like people are like, what do you want to be? I don't freaking know. So went to college, started in management, hated it because it was all common sense, and shift to marketing. And part of marketing is sales. And I was like, man, this is where the money's at, right? Like that's attractive. I like that. My
Yeah.
grandfather was a really successful salesperson, my great grandfather. So I had that kind of in my lineage, right, in my blood. And getting out of college, I didn't know still like where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. So I actually stayed at the college and worked for the college doing admissions, which is essentially sales for the
Yeah.
school. And I found it just crazy easy. And I just didn't make any money, right? Like I was making like 23,000 a year, right? So I had a roommate, still was not able to pay the bills. Like this sucks.
Yeah.
So decided I had to go find a job for real. And that was kind of during a recession. So there was not a lot of jobs out there to be had. And looking around, I recognized that commission-based sales, there's a million of those opportunities. So I tested myself in that a little bit and started with like life insurance and a couple, things in that world, right? But the mentor that I had for that had MS and just like abandoned me. So I worked for 3 months with no clue what I was doing, no idea how to do it, and just realized I can't make $0 forever. Like I have to go find something else. And there's a company in town, Geico. And if you're US based, you've heard of us. Us. I'm not there anymore. but them. And Geico was hiring in town, and I was like, you know what? They have a large sales team. Um, so I just went and got whatever job they would hire me for.
Yeah.
So they hired me in as a customer service representative, and I basically did an internal transfer as fast as possible into the sales side. Um, and when I got to sales, that's when everything changed. So I mean, my first month, I made my first bonus, took my wife on a cruise, life changed, right? I was like,
Yeah.
dude, this this is where it's at. And it didn't take long for me to realize that even though sales for me was a huge departure from the customer service side, um, what I really enjoyed was teaching other people to do it and to
Yeah.
see their huge wins. So for me, I started doing the coaching side within just a couple years of jumping on at Geico, and um, started teaching new people how to sell. Eventually, I did some work in their training department there, and then took over some sales teams. And from there, I had to figure out, okay, well, I know how to sell from a basic level, but how do I help everybody on my team sell? Right? How do I help everybody here be better at what they do? And I didn't think about it from that level of intentionality. To be honest, it was almost like a position of desperation. Like, how do I succeed here? Like, what do I do? And so I went and found a few mentors, and they started teaching me the things that stuck with me to this day. And a lot of it had to do with the difference between tactic and strategy, and understanding what was the real motivation of a buyer, and how do you get them to walk down that buying decision path instead of forcing them down whatever path you want them to go down, because that does not end well. And I did a lot of studying the people who were successful there, and what they were doing wasn't what was being taught as the reason for success, right? So people would say, oh, you have to be super friendly, and you have to be this, and you have to be that. And then I would have this guy who was, number one, number two on the sales floor, and he was the most monotone person you've ever heard in your entire life. You're like, well, how is he number one or number two? Like, what's different about that guy that he's succeeding? Right. So I had to go back and kind of unlearn what they were teaching, and relearn it from a strategy level as opposed to a tactics level. And that opened up everything for me. So I stayed in that department for a while, and then moved on to kind of other projects and other departments, for a lot of different reasons. But um, I was teaching those strategies in other departments so that they could optimize what they're doing. And we were seeing great success in learning sales strategies in other departments, for customer retention, for internal communication, for all kinds of stuff. So it was really good. But long story short, I am not the kind of person that actually fits well in a corporation. I tend to voice my opinion with a little too much authority, and ask the kind of uncomfortable questions that people don't want asked. And when you do
Yeah.
that too often, you find yourself parked in a certain position, unable to move forward. And I was
Yeah.
kind of there, where I was told, yeah, you can get a promotion, but you have to move to Iowa, and we're not giving you any more money. I was like, yeah, I'm not doing it.
Uh,
So between that and
yeah.
some health problems I was having, I knew I had to find something different. And in the middle of that is when I started a gym. So my most skilled salesperson that ever worked for me was buff. I mean, jacked out of his mind. And this guy wanted to start a gym, and I was like, like, you got everything you need, bro. You're jacked. You're a crazy good seller. He's like, I just don't know how to start a gym. So I stepped in kind of as the business side partner, and we started that up in 18, and like survived the pandemic and all that mess. But it was interesting because that was kind of the first opportunity for me to apply those skills, the strategy side skills, to
Mhm.
something other than what I had been doing for a while. And I
Yeah.
noticed very, very quickly that the results were even more dramatic in a small business than they were in a corporate side. I was hoping for a 5 to 10% increase on the corporate side when I was, successful. Sometimes I would see a 20%, and everybody like lost their minds. But
Mhm.
on the small business side, I could see a 200% increase in revenue when we got things dialed in, right?
Yeah.
Um, and my clients have seen 300, 400% in depending on their starting point. So
Yeah.
for me, I was like, okay, this is a path that I can provide a ton of value, And at the same time, I kind of found that Twitter space, money Twitter or whatever you want to call it. Stumbled upon some of those guys and was like, all right, this is a cool spot to be, right? It was a neat entrepreneurial enclave. And so, I just decided to start providing as much value there as possible and see what happens. And, made some solid connections and was able to get the ball rolling, like get that momentum started. And that was it, right? So about 3 years ago, you know, got that process rolling, picked up my first couple of clients and had massive success with them. And, you know, from there it was, I guess, you know, what you see now.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a ton of questions, and I think you
Yeah.
definitely underplayed like the significance of like your experience in the corporate environment. Like I feel like I've seen you post out like something about 70 million in revenue or something. Like is that the right
Yeah.
number?
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
So
70 million in
you did
revenue.
that you did that for how long? Like a long time, right?
Yeah. So I worked for that company for over 14 years and I was doing sales directly for probably 9 or 10. I was in that world. So managing teams, like I said, originally doing some selling myself, but managing teams and improving the results, et cetera.
And you said that you said your great grandfather had sales experience, like he was a killer.
Both
Um,
my grandfather and my great grandfather. So yeah,
okay,
my grandfather sold blinds, which you wouldn't think was a big deal, but he was doing B2B massive corporate accounts and was making more than the CEO. Like he was crushing.
yeah,
And my great grandfather, he sold explosives and like back in the old days when California just started um, kind of blossoming. Hollywood was hot. He moved out there and made a killing. So yeah, I definitely
mhm.
have kind of some sales lineage down that side for sure.
Yeah. That was one thing I wanted to hit on because so many people, I'm sure they come to you just like they come to me, and they're like, oh, I don't know if I can do sales. Like I don't know if I'm cut out for it. It's not my personality. And like it
Mm.
sounds like you maybe were a little bit more warm to the idea, like, yeah, my people, my family have done it. I can probably pick it up. But it wasn't like your immediate thing where it's like, okay, graduate high school, sales job.
Yeah, not
Um,
at all. Not at
did
all.
you, yeah, how much thought went into like, can I do sales? Like, would I have success? All that before you actually did it.
That's a great question. I was actually terrified, to be honest, because the reality is I was an introvert my entire childhood. Like I was
Yeah.
quiet, I was embarrassed to speak. I hated being in front of people. I hated people hearing what I had to say. Like all of that was who I was kind of naturally. And a lot of that changed. You talk about kind of your life path, but a lot of that changed when I started working out in high school. Like I realized that I had control over my own body, ultimately control over my own life. And people saw me a lot differently when I exercised that control. And for whatever reason, I think that was kind of the shifting points in my perspective and my ability to communicate with people.
Mhm.
And in college, as I was kind of making those decisions and ultimately ended up on that sales side, it was one of those things where I was like, shoot, is that quiet side of me gonna overrule, what I know I can do logically, you know? Um, and there was a lot of like doubt and fear initially, but I just had to try it and see. And what I found was the reality was there was two sides of me. There really was. So I could be that guy who was worried about what people were thinking and worried to ask for the sale. And if I was that guy, I didn't get a sale. Right? Like it's not hard to
Yeah.
imagine what happens when you're worried about that outcome. Or I could own the process, think through everything from a high level, and be the salesperson I needed to be, not just to succeed, but to ultimately um, help everybody involved, right? To play out win-win scenarios. And that was for me the game changer. And the less I got in my own head and the more I got into my process of communication and flow, the better things got for me. And
Yeah.
I was kind of my own first test case on how do I fix somebody who's worried about what other people think or worried about slumps, right? And what that means about them, right? Does that mean I'm a terrible salesperson because I haven't closed anybody in the last couple of weeks, or I've had the worst results I've had in years? What does that mean, and how do I fix it? So I was my own first test case with that, and
Yeah.
for me, it was almost always some kind of determination, writing down what I wanted, and then some physical manifestation of the change I was making. So I might have
Yeah.
changed the way that I dressed or whatever, but that mental game I learned very quickly. Whatever I had to do to secure the mental side was, kind of the launching point for everything else.
Yeah. So after all that experience outside of a sales environment, do you still find yourself being more of like that reserved, introverted guy, or do you think this all the sales stuff has kind of changed who you are?
I have changed. I'm a different person. I have pushed myself in that sense. And the further I got in my career, the more I found myself speaking to larger and larger groups, right? So ultimately, I could speak to several hundred people without a problem. And I didn't sweat it at all, right? I would step up in front of them totally comfortably and confidently. I didn't even have to have notes. Like I would just stand up there and know I was going to nail it. And I would.
Yeah.
And that type of thing gave me kind of a reassurance that I had the skills necessary, and this is who I am, right? I am the guy that can do this, and that has, like I said, has changed me into an entirely different person from that shy child who couldn't, you know, be in the Christmas play or whatever the heck was going on.
It's interesting. I've I found myself like I used to get super uncomfortable whenever I had to like I remember speech class in high
Oh
school
yeah,
and killed me, man. But I found myself, especially after getting into sales, being able to like hone in the ability to like speak in front of people well and perform, so to speak. But even
yeah,
now, like I've been in sales for about 3 years now, not even that long. Um, I still find myself just like in normal everyday life, like I'm more of a I don't even want to say introvert because I don't like the word, I don't like the label, but I'm more of
yep,
like a listener, man. Like I'm gonna let you speak, I'm gonna listen. I'm not the life or like the life of the party. Like I'm not the center point. I don't want to be. Um, so I was curious how that like kind of evolved, being that you've been in it for over 20 years. Is that right? Now
almost, yeah, almost 20.
about okay. Yeah, I mean that's something I actually never thought about before. Like, does the sales experience actually change who you are outside of the sales environment? But
It
so
gives you a
fast,
different level of confidence. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And that's the thing too. Like now, again, I don't like to use the introvert label I used to, but I mean, if I had to go and speak in front of a room of people because I'm just practice, like put in the reps, like I can do it, even though it's like I don't love it, you know.
yeah.
Uh,
And
I wanted to ask
one thing I
you.
wanted to touch on there,
Go ahead.
yeah, one thing I wanted to touch on there real quick is a lot of people assume that extroverts are the natural salespeople, right? Because they don't have a problem like speaking to people, and they don't have a problem like sometimes making people a little uncomfortable, right? Um, which people see as like a necessary trait for sales. Like, oh, you have to make people really uncomfortable and ask over and over for the sale. But the truth is, like, there are a lot of different styles of sales, first of all. And there's a lot of different things that work. So people have to find what is in resonance with their own personality and their own, um, communication style. Like my business partner at the gym, him and I sell totally differently, and we're both successful, right? He's super extroverted, doesn't mind making people uncomfortable, and he's more of that classic like
Yeah.
salesperson, right? But the thing is, like I had to teach him when he worked for me how to rein that back, right? How to turn that
Mhm.
down so that he could actually be more successful.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm naturally a quieter, calmer person that just takes things as they come. I've worked that into my sales style, right? So I'm not the guy that's aggressively pushing people. They don't feel like they're on a sales call, right? They feel like they're in a conversation. And at the end, they find themselves able to make a buying decision. And that's a totally different style of sales. So personality type doesn't mean you can or can't be a salesperson at all. It just means that you have to discover the thing that works for you and steer into what you're strong at, right? If you're really weak at one area, while it's important to strengthen your weaknesses, don't go be that person, right? That's not the way that you're going to find the most success. Instead, discover what you're good at and figure out how to leverage that thing to be successful.
This, you just prompted like I think a pretty cool question. Would you rather have, let's say you're training somebody new, would you rather have them be leaning farther on like the extroverted typical sales guy side of the spectrum where you have to like work with them to dial it back, or would you rather work with like the introvert who, you can teach them the frameworks really well, but like you have to, work with them on the other end of things. Like which do you think is easier, and who do you think would pick up faster and have more success, if any?
Yeah, it's a funny question because I don't think that either of those things ends up mattering. I think it ends up mattering how people are willing to adjust. If I'm working with somebody that's willing to make changes to what they do, I want to work with that person. If I'm working with somebody that just wants to do the thing that they do over and over again and hope it works, that's never going to work. So it doesn't matter really if they're extroverted or introverted, but I'll just say like the thing that I find happens fastest is often dialing back an extrovert, um, because the introvert, the things that we have to build for them to be really successful, um, there tends to be a little bit of learning involved. And it's not a bad thing because once they are successful, I've found personally that a larger percentage of my top performers were introverts, were the quieter type. But it's building that system to be successful that takes a little bit more time. So if I had a short window to say how fast can I get somebody going, give me the extrovert. Like I'll teach them a few things and they'll be successful. But if it's like I want the best possible results over the longest period of time, give me a room full of introverts, and then let me work with them for a while. We'll end up crushing.
I like that answer. I think that's like pretty fair assessment of what I would say too, because I think, I mean, it is a lot of extra again, like using these labels with
Right.
caution here, but like a lot of extroverts think just because they talk a shit ton, they think like, oh yeah, I would be a great salesperson, and then they have that in their mind. It's like, no, I'm like built for this. Like I don't need to change. I don't need to do this, and then they end up like not really doing anything significant. Whereas the introvert, if they see it through for a year or two, like they're going to be a lot more like tactical, I think.
Yeah.
And
And you know what you
I mean,
find? That extrovert that thinks they're amazing and that they can just talk anybody into buying, if you look at their results on the back end, and I don't mean front end closing, I mean back end, what are the client results for those people? The client results for those types of salespeople end up worse, significantly worse, because
yeah,
what they're doing is they're forcing people into a buying decision they're not yet comfortable with. And in order to become comfortable, they say yes, they make a payment, right? The salesperson thinks that's a win, but then the delivery team has somebody that's not happy, not comfortable, right? And not totally bought in. And you
yeah,
have to now bring that person results. That's really difficult. So the person who's kind of slamming sales and they're like, yeah, I'm an extrovert. I'm amazing at this. Like, okay, I mean, your front end results are pretty cool, but like I wouldn't want you doing that for me. Like I wouldn't be very happy about that.
yeah. To transition farther along the timeline here,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you were killing it as a sales rep. When did you realize like, hey, the sales coaching and consulting thing is more up my alley? Because there's mixed takes on this, right? People say, oh yeah, I mean it's the same skill or it's different skills, or you have to be good at one to be good at the other. Like what's your take on all that, and how do you know that that was for
That's a
you?
good question. So I was a different person then too than I am now. I've changed, like who I am as a person has changed multiple times over the course of my life. At that time, I really wanted to move up in corporate America. Like I just thought that it would be sweet to be a VP and just be chilling, in my corner office and living that, that life. And I was like, yeah, that'd be cool. Let's do that. So for me, I was like, I knew I had to make a lot less money in the short term, um, to step into the training side to get out of actual sales. And I did. I mean, I took a big pay cut to do that. But very quickly, I realized how much more I enjoyed that side of it. And even as, again, my own personality conflicted with that necessary to be successful in corporate America, I realized like getting back into the actual selling side, I can make more money at it still, even when I was in the management side. But it just wasn't going to be something I enjoyed quite as much as teaching other people to do it. And as far as, who can be the most successful, I do think that there's something to experience. If you are really great at something, you may have some insights that others don't. But I think more importantly, a lot of people that are really successful don't actually know why they're successful. They have no clue what they're doing differently that's creating their result. They think, oh, I'm just doing it. This is what I do. I just do it. Now you go do it. And that type of coaching for other people works about 50% of the time because somebody can hear that. And if they happen to have whatever those traits are, or they happen to do something that same way, then it will work. But if for whatever reason there's something different, it's not going to produce the same result. They don't have the, um, I don't the awareness maybe to
Yeah.
say, okay, why isn't that working, and what's different from what was working, and how do we fix that so that you can get the results necessary. So
Yeah.
sometimes being an ultra high performer in a teaching situation can be a detriment because you don't know necessarily what to do for people who aren't just like you. And we see that in the coaching side in small business, right? Like there are guys out there who crushed it in their own processes. And when you go pay them to learn what to do, all they're going to do is tell you what they did. So if you don't have the same success executing their playbook, they have no idea how to help you, right? And
Yeah.
and that happens a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I've seen the inside of a bunch of coaching programs at this point, and I'm sure you have too. Um, between like all your clients being that they all start in different spots and different revenue and company structure and all that, like what are like I mean maybe one or a few of the things that have really helped you deliver consistent results no matter where they are starting or their current situation.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really helpful is I always look at their whole thing from a top end, like top level first. Where do I see friction points and where do I see, you know, drop off, right? Where are people diving out of this flow in this process? And it may not be a sales call, right? That may not be their biggest struggle.
Right.
It may be. And then if it is the sales call, where on that sales call, are people feeling that friction and not moving forward? So
Yeah.
from that perspective, it gives me a lot of insight really fast into where's the problem. And then because I have that breadth of experience in tons of industries, tons of years of experience, and listening to thousands and thousands of calls, I hear something and it just jumps out at me like, ugh, that doesn't work, right? Like what you did there, broken. Let's talk about
Mm.
that and let's fix it, right? So then I'll give people normally a couple of alternatives. This is how I would do it. This is another way you could do it. And I'll give people a reason for the change. Um,
Yeah.
so just as an example, a lot of people like certain styles of asking for the sale, certain styles of close. Some people present the price and just shut up and wait. Some people have a very specific, like win-win close they pitch. So like everybody has their thing. And I'm the guy that says, like, I don't care what you say to ask for the sale. I don't care which one you pick. It doesn't matter. And they're like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? I mean, isn't that the most pivotal point of the conversation? I'm like, no, not at all. Like it really isn't. It's an indicator, but it's not the most pivotal thing that you're going to say.
Right.
So for me, I view it from that high level and I say, okay, so if you are way more comfortable asking for the sale this way and you don't have the internal friction by doing it that way, that's going to be better because you're going to have a more natural conversation at that point. Let's change it, right? So, I think that breadth of experience comes into play there, and I've seen it work every kind of way. So I
Yeah.
know when I see somebody's call or I hear somebody's process, like stuff will jump out at me that's obviously broken, but also there's some nuance that I will have picked up over the years and say, like, that little phrase is killing all your sales. And they're like, why? That doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if it makes sense to you now. You'll see it later.
There's, I think there's a lot of people that, like, a lot of people get into like high ticket sales, coaching space, whatever, like as their first sales job. Like they didn't do door to
Yeah.
door, they didn't do cold calling, they didn't do all the other stuff. And then they start focusing on, oh, how do I like ask for the sale? Like, do I say this? Do I do this structure? Or do I shut up after? Like, those are the same people
Yeah.
who focus on like objections versus maybe a discovery, maybe pre-call screening and qualification and all that. That I wanted to ask you, having seen a bunch of these coaching programs, like how much of the sale do you think should be made or can be made before they even hop on the call? Like if we're talking, booking application or VSL and all that stuff, like ideally in your situation, what do you do with your clients? Like, do you try to optimize that first and then, make sure they're super, super qualified, or like, what's your method there?
Yeah. I'll give you some of the sauce on that, man. So when I'm looking at a new client and I'm thinking through like, what are we going to do to maximize your revenue as fast as possible? Right. Like that's ultimately my goal. Like I want to make you as much money as fast as possible. How are we going to get there? Sometimes, I'll look at their process to that communication process with prospects, and there's inconsistencies in what they are communicating. And that is a huge problem. I find inconsistency to be a much bigger problem than their than their message even sometimes, because they'll say to a prospect when they reach out in a cold message like, hey, this is what I can do for you, and then they'll send them to a landing page with a VSL that says something totally different, right? And then they'll have them fill out a questionnaire for the call that asks totally unrelated questions, and then the salesperson gets on and introduces themselves and goes down yet another path of discovery and conversation, not even related to those first three. And that inconsistency just, kills sales. So
Yeah.
I always, the first thing is just check for consistency in communication. Are you communicating your actual offer and what you can do for people? Are you giving them the social proof necessary for them to believe that you can do this? And then from there, if we need to optimize that message, then we will. But most of the time,
Yeah.
that's enough, right? But
Yeah.
I think that the more you can do before the call to warm a prospect, the better. There's no reason not to, especially like pre-call email sequences and stuff like that. If you're doing sales off of cold outreach, like they still don't really know you from Adam, so it's good to have at least something there. So they're like, okay, I kind of know who this person is and what they do. So then when you have that sales call, whether it's your offer or somebody else's, it's a lot less like explaining from scratch what you're even doing on the phone call, and it's more, hey, you know what we do, and we're just going to see if this is a fit, right? Like, does this
Yeah.
make sense or not?
Yeah. And this is pretty like in the weeds conversation, but the pre-call stuff was actually something that I've been like working a lot on recently, and just been chatting to a lot of people on like what they should or shouldn't be doing. And curious on your take for like B2B versus B2C. Like if I'm gonna send
Yeah.
a cold email to book a call, like how much more or less kind of qualification pre-selling are you doing versus like B2C inbound lead, Instagram story to DM funnel,
Yeah. One thing I think a lot of people get wrong is like B2B and B2C selling strategically is the same, but tactically couldn't be further apart. Because what I mean by that is, let's say you've got the strategy of like discovering their pain points, you know, pitching your offer from the perspective of those pain points, whatever. If you start reaching out to people in a B2B scenario and you're asking like personalized pain point type questions, what are they going to, what the freak, who is this joker? Like, I'm not telling you that. And even if you start asking them pain point questions about their business right up front, they're like, no, like, we're not talking about that. So
Yeah.
when it comes to B2B, you have to earn the right to ask those questions a little differently. And you've got to communicate very fast what the obvious ROI is going to be in having this conversation, right? And that's normally just presenting the big upside of your offer, showing evidence that you're able to deliver on that promise, and then simply saying like, hey, I can do this for you, right? I'm confident I can do this for you. Is that something you'd be willing to have a further conversation about? And a B2B offer, they see that, they're like, this is a clear ROI win for us. Let's have the conversation. When it comes to B2C, that side, even if it's a biz op, it's B2C really, right? And so what we're doing is like, we're discovering who this person is, right? What is their dream? What is their pain? And it's way more personalized. It's way more in depth in terms of that perspective. You can't just show them a hard ROI and expect them to respond in the same way that a B2B did. And you've got to kind of walk through that almost like psychologist, process a little more. But either way, ultimately, the buying decision is going to be emotional, and it will be made by a few people, one or a few, and you will have to discover what those pain points are. But with B2B, there's layers to getting there. You don't get to start there, right? With B2C, you can start there because you're talking to the decision maker who's probably in a lot of pain already, right? So it's a really easy like way to dive in on that. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a long explanation, but I think that strategically it is a lot different, and it's really important to understand who are you talking to, what do you have to do to be able to earn the right to have these conversations that will make the sale, and then from that perspective, what's that first piece of communication necessary to start the conversation, right? And that's where it is a difference maker.
Yeah, I think that topic in itself is like a whole podcast episode. You can take it so many different ways, and I mean, even though yes, there's a ton of similarities, you got to go about them a little bit differently, which is again, it's a very difficult thing to teach, right? It's like teaching, even. I mean, I guess we probably started in similar spots, more of like the introverted type style, but like going back to the introvert extrovert, teaching them those two different styles, two completely different things, right?
Yeah.
But to continue moving along the timeline here, you opened a gym 2018.
Yeah.
Because the buffest salesperson in your office was like, "Hey, I don't know how to open a gym." Did he ask you because you knew how to open a gym, or why did he ask you?
So I had like who I was at that place. I was the kind of person I always stood out as being way different than everybody else in management because I encouraged people to actually do what was good for them, not do what was good for the company. And sometimes what's good for you happened to align with what was good for the company, and that's great. I encourage that. When it didn't align, I didn't try to shoehorn you into something else. I just encouraged you to go do what was good for you. And that freaked people out, but it turned out to be super successful because I had the highest retention of employees out of anybody there, because they loved me, they trusted me, and I had honest conversations with them, right? But one of the things that I would do, and I've got some hilarious stories for you about it, but I probably won't have to dive into them all today. But I would encourage people who are entrepreneurial in spirit to explore that, right? Hey, I want to start a business one day. Okay, great. So why aren't you starting that today? Well, I don't know how. I was like, cool. Let's have a quick conversation, right? Let's sign out on a coaching meeting, and let's have a conversation about how you start a business. And I talked to them for 10 minutes about the first steps they had to take, right? If they did those things, then we would talk more. But because I would encourage people to do those things, and I just kind of learned that. I mean, I have an MBA, so I knew some of that stuff from school, but most of the stuff I learned just out of interest in business and bettering myself, right? I would just pass those things on to them. But he would see me have those conversations with other people, and ultimately was like, dude, if there's anybody that I want to start a business with, it would be the guy that is always encouraging other people to be successful in business. And he reached out to me and was like, dude, I see what you have done for other people to help them start their businesses. Like, would you be willing to help me start this and partner with me on it? So
yeah,
that was kind of how we got that rolling.
Yeah, my first sales job, I was in roofing sales, and the owner of the company, who was also a sales manager, kind of a smaller company, but like very very reputable in our area, had the same thing where he would like encourage people to start their own thing on the side, including like the sales reps who, I was commission only, and he wanted us, to make, the money that we could make there, but he was like, hey, get into real estate. I remember we went out to like Payway or something for lunch in between like appointments, and man, he was breaking down like, I've got these properties residential, I've got these properties commercial. This is how, like, I wish somebody would have taught me this whenever I was your age. Like, you put money into this, it flows this way, it flows that way. You know,
Mm,
you've got money in the door, and you're, not doing all that much.
that's
And so,
powerful,
like,
man.
yeah, like I had known about real estate, I knew about the single family stuff and all that, but then he started like introducing new stuff to me, and ultimately I ended up quitting to do my own thing, which like it's bittersweet, but like every time I touch base with him, it's like a super refreshing conversation. He's always like, "Dude, I'm so happy to see you doing well and all that." And dude, he was like the best boss that I had, because he actually encouraged me, even though he was the owner and the sales manager. He encouraged me to go do
Yeah,
stuff outside, so long as like my performance wasn't in the gutter.
right.
So
Yeah,
that, like, I could 100% understand why people wanted to keep working for you if you were that person. Um, I want to hit on this because this is a perspective that you have that I'm sure not many others do. But owning a gym, 2020 comes around. I'm sure it wasn't the easiest of times. You're in Florida, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm in Florida.
So how did you guys do it?
Yeah. So, dude, I'll walk you through the timeline real quick. Like we started in 2018, and like we started on a shoestring budget, man. Like we all kind of cashed in whatever equity we had on houses or whatever. Like we just threw it all in and said, like, let's freaking just send it. And
Yeah.
like, put the place together, bought the equipment, and I had a timeline of like, we have to get this level of growth, we have to hit these targets, or we're screwed. Like we're gonna just close the thing down and say we failed, right? But through the first, I mean, 12 months, we nailed our growth targets, like absolutely killed it. And like we were profitable, we were in the green at month 9, which was awesome. So, for a physical property to be in the green that quickly was great, right? And then 2 weeks before the COVID announcement, we had a coach get like super weird and take off with 25% of our business, like all of our personal training business. Like he just disappeared, right? And we're like, dude, what the heck was that? And then 2 weeks after that, COVID hit and we lost 50% of our revenue overnight. Boom. Right. So we were immediately back in just bloody water, just bleeding out our cash reserves. So we basically looked at all of our options. We're like, all right, we can close, like that's an option. Or we can kind of leverage additional debt as long as our growth maintains appropriate pace. It's no problem whatsoever to deal with that. We had no idea how long COVID was going to go. We had no idea anything. Like, were people going to come back to gyms? Like, was it moving online? Like, we didn't know anything. But we decided, like, okay, people still are going to need a place to exercise. It's a physical need for people. If they can't do this at home for whatever reason, they want to go somewhere. We want to be the place that people go and find most comfortable, and we want to be the high end gym in town. So we knew there was going to be demand for it as long as we were allowed to have our doors open. And
Yeah.
so we moved forward with securing additional debt. But the wild thing is, it didn't take us that long to get back to profit because we tested new marketing processes. We tried you know, new like referral processes. We tried advertising processes, and we just tried so many different ways to find additional clients that we ended up growing at or better than the pace that we were with no restriction, right? No COVID, no nothing. And that taught me a ton about, you know, figuring out what to do in that moment. And like, okay, if I've got to figure it out, here are the things that we're going to do to go through in terms of finding that additional client. And that, dude, that was one of the best lessons. Like I say it all the time because it's true, but it's also pretty stupid and cliche. But that like 6 month window was worth more to me in terms of business education than my undergrad in marketing, my MBA, and any other formal education I've ever had. It wasn't even close. If I had
Yeah.
just gone through that one experience, I would know more than if I had done all that other stuff. And I told my partners at the time, like, dude, even if we fail at this point for whatever reason, like this is a huge win for us personally because we've learned so much. But yeah, I mean, we
Yeah,
didn't fail, and we're doing well. So
awesome. Why? I mean, man, it probably would have been so easy to just say, "Hey, man, we had a good run. You know, let's cut our losses and let's go do something else." Like, why'd you decide to stick with it so hard?
I hate quitting, man. Like something about it. Like I just hate it. I hate quitting. And for me, also, like I knew that logically this was a successful business on paper, and our clients freaking loved it. Right? We had 100%, success rate when it came to people loving the gym. I was like, okay, so if on paper the math works and our clients love us, like we'd be really stupid to just run away from this because we don't understand the short game right now
Yeah,
because we don't know what's going on. So that's why we secured debt instead of trying to just wing it and hoped it worked out short term. We wanted enough run out to say, if we're bleeding money at this rate, we've got enough time to figure this whole thing out and even kind of start fresh as a business if we have to. And we didn't end up having to use all the debt we secured, and now as a result, like it's a couple $100 a month to pay down the debt. Like it's literally
yeah,
nothing. So
cool, cool. I guess to transition into like more of the stuff you're doing today, the coaching, all that.
yeah.
But first, kind of wrap up the gym stuff. Like, where? I mean, as far as the gym stuff goes, like, are you still working day to day operations, or like what does that look like for you today as you're doing all the coaching and consulting stuff as well?
Yeah, I've never really done the day to day, so to speak. I was always kind of acting almost as a consultant to the gym. I did a lot more early. Like I was there a whole lot more early because there was nobody else there. Right? We didn't have coaches. We didn't have like it was us running it.
Yeah,
But as we hired staff, as we expanded, the people who were doing the work, I've removed myself more and more, and now you know, my actual workload is essentially like running the back end paperwork, handling taxes, and then a monthly owners meeting where we talk about long term strategy and decisions.
cool.
So I don't have that same workload um,
Yeah,
anymore at all, and it doesn't really interfere in any way with everything else that I do.
cool. What's the vision for the gym? Like, where are you guys going to take it?
Originally, man, we wanted to just keep opening more gyms, right? Like let's expand this thing, but we both, all three of us, found out really fast that we don't love running a gym. And what I mean by that is like we love the fitness, we love the impact in the community, and we love that specific gym, but we
Hmm.
don't want to go do that in other places because the
Yeah,
relationships are what made that gym valuable to us, not the running of the gym. Does that make sense?
yeah,
So even though we have solid relationships with the members, with our staff, like we wouldn't want to go do that same thing again in another town because the stresses of that without the relationships being built, it makes it
yeah,
totally like it's not worth it. And then on top of that, when you talk about leverage, like if you're talking about a fitness offer online selling for $3,000 for 90 days, right?
mhm,
And renewing at that if you wanted to, whatever. You're making $1,000 a month revenue per client. What am I making at the gym? Like 185 to 560, depending on what they're doing there. Like
yeah,
the level of revenue is higher online than it is in person, and you have no overhead. Like where's your overhead? You don't own all that equipment. You don't have rent and the utilities and all that stuff to pay, right? So in my mind, like if I was ever to go down that path again, it would be with online offers only.
yeah, yeah.
But the current
That's
gym, like honestly, we're gonna just leave it open and profitable forever. Like it's just gonna run as it stands because one of my partners, like that's his entire income, and he manages the day to day. He loves it. Like that works great for him. My other partner lives in like Tennessee now. He doesn't even go there very often. And me, I'm kind of that. It's a cash flow asset for me, right?
yeah.
So you could think about it
It's not
as if I put a lot of sweat equity into a rental home.
yeah. It's not the easiest business to run, and with
It
what
is not.
people are doing online now, like just the fitness offer example. I mean, you and I both know some people doing pretty well with that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Seven
so
figure
much
businesses all
possibility.
day.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now you've got this going. It's kind of, not the forefront of your mental capacity at this point. Now it is the sales coaching, the sales consulting, working with coaches, and is it just like high ticket service providers or
Yeah. I
um,
think that's a good way to put it. High ticket service providers. Yeah. My first two clients were, one was actually a deck builder, like building decks, right? And the other was
yeah,
a fitness offer. So it was like two opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of what I was working with. But just to give you an example of like when I say I saw immediately the value of it, the deck builder was struggling to fill his month's calendar. So he had downtime for his crew, right? And that's expensive. You
yeah,
don't want to have crew doing nothing. And so he's like, dude, what do we do? Right. So we worked together for a few weeks to get everything dialed in. And by the end of the month, he was booked out for 2 months in advance and he had to raise his prices. So
mm,
the small changes made a huge difference in his business. And that was one of those like first moments where I was like, oh crap, like what I can do
yeah.
is help a lot. Yeah.
Was it like? I mean, obviously you had to do some marketing. Like, I'm sure you being in sales, you know a thing or two about marketing as well. Like, was that a big part of the equation with that particular case, or
So I'll kind of walk you through what's going on. So, if you pay for Angie's List as a construction company, you're going to be on people's minds. But there's a
yeah,
certain, opportunity window that you have to take advantage of. So he already had opportunities. The problem was he wasn't closing the deals, right? So he was
mm,
having conversations, he was even going out and doing quotes, but people weren't paying him to build the deck, right? And it was like, what is going wrong? Something's not working here because I should be building a lot more decks. And it wasn't like Angie's List or whatever it was is expensive, and it had a ton of leads. So the lead flow was never his problem, really. It was just how do I figure out how to present these people with the right information at the right time in the right way so that I can get booked business. And for us, I mean, the reality was as soon as we shifted a couple small things in his process, people were giving him security deposits on spot, and he was booking
yeah.
business. It was really quick. Yeah,
Don't tell me you found a deck builder on Money Twitter.
I
Just
did, man. Yeah,
what? That's crazy.
yeah.
In like local to you or somewhere
No,
else?
no, somewhere else. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so let's talk about that. And I think that'll like come in well with the coaching and the stuff you're doing today. Money Twitter, like when did you say you found it?
I like three
Like
years ago.
okay, so you got the gym open. You're probably messing around on Twitter. Maybe you found like one person. A lot of people know like, oh yeah, this is the guy that I saw who kind of opened the door. Who do you know who that person was for you?
I do know who that person was. So Ed Lattimore was the first person in the space at all that I saw, and
Yeah,
I thought he was funny, right? But I didn't like it. Didn't trigger the concept of like online business for me. But he has, I don't know how much you know about Ed, but he retweets a
yeah,
lot of people. One of the persons that he retweeted was this pastor in like Oregon who had an info product business, and this guy was like had one of his tweets retweeted by him. I followed that guy, and like he was really nobody, right, on Twitter, but he was in that space, and I went down the rabbit hole on his stuff, and then started following more people like Nate Dean, Chronicles of Nate. I don't know if you know him. He's an absolute animal. He's the man, and a bunch of people kind of at that time who were just starting out,
mm-hmm.
and only had a few thousand followers, but were providing a lot of cool information. There was, um, Black Hat was the cold email whiz. You had
Yeah,
JK was at the time starting out, a bunch of those
yeah.
guys, and Dan Coe, um, and so all those guys were kind of around, and I was having conversations with them and seeing what was possible right at the time, and not to see those guys all kind of blow up and do amazingly is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, at some point you decided to start posting content. Was it from day one, or was it like, you know what, man, I'm already spending time here. I might as well, put something out there.
Dude, it was this silly gradual thing for me. Like, um, Jake Schmelzer was the guy I told you about that I started following, and he had an info product business, and he was like, I DM'd him and he was talking to me. He's a cool cat. He's like, dude, you have tons of valuable information in your head that you're not sharing that people would love to see, right? He's like, why don't you just start sharing that? And he's like, you can ultimately turn that into a business down the road, but it starts with building an audience of people that are interested in hearing what you have to say. And so that's what started me down the path of kind of writing some of my own content. And then, you know, for me, I think that kind of reaping what you sow is a big factor in my mentality. And really early, I was like, okay, how can I invest in other people at scale? Like, that's a really hard thing to do when you have no audience. So I reached out to two guys that were launching their products and said, I want to give you something for your product free, just included in there, right? And one of those was Matt Pack. I don't know if you know him. The agency course, which was like one of the first things that sent people down the path of running their agencies. And I had the sales module in that. And I only had like 1,000 followers at the time. Like, nobody followed me at all. And
Yeah.
then Dan Coe was launching uh, his course, and I had a module in his. And then I ended up doing podcasts with Dan and a few other people, and all of that was, I wasn't making any money from any of that stuff. But what it ended up doing was solidifying my reputation as somebody that actually does know about sales, right? And in a space full of young men with honestly very little experience, I had a lot of experience. And it was easy for me to kind of display that expertise in those mediums. And even though my following was very small when I really launched my coaching offer, I think it was 2,300. And I hired Sean, Western Mastery, to help me launch that. But even with just a small audience, I launched to a successful start. Um, and I mean, it was really good because I had established that authority, and the people that followed me for that specific reason.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned some pretty big names in the space. Obviously, you don't work with those people and not create some super valuable connections. I always tell people, like, some of the connections I've made on this side of Twitter with, other people in this space. It's just like you could never predict what would come of it, and it might
Yeah,
not give you some direct ROI in a week or a month, but like a year later, now this person knows someone who needs someone who just so happens to have $10,000 to pay up front for X service.
yeah,
um,
for sure.
it's crazy how that happens, and I don't know why. Whenever I wanted to escape corporate, I guess you could call it, or like escape my traditional sales job,
Yeah,
just I saw what these guys were doing on Twitter. Like I came across this in 2018, but more on like the ecom side of things.
yep,
But I
yep,
saw some guys like running up the agency model, the coaching model, and I kind of disappeared and came back. And when I quit my job, for some reason, like Twitter was just one thing that I had to do in order to make this work.
yeah,
And looking back, holy shit, like I'm so glad I did it because you know, it's like the main advertising channel, I guess, for anything that I have to offer people.
yeah.
Um, it's awesome. So I guess
I think you touched on something there that's. I mean, one of the most powerful aspects of this platform is the connections that you can make really quickly. Um, and now, like you said, I have connections with people literally all over the world. But I mean, I've made some very deep connections with people that are lifelong connections. And those are the
yeah,
kinds of things that impact the trajectory of your life, right? That really do change who you are as a person because you've put yourself out there, you've connected with people, you've you've given of yourself to them, and they do the same back. And I mean, I think that's one of the main beauties of this platform. You don't see anything like that on like Instagram or it just doesn't happen. So,
Yeah,
this is just such a unique place for that. And I don't know, I appreciate it and value it for that.
yeah. Is Twitter your main channel?
Yeah, it is. And much to the chagrin of many of my coaches, I haven't even really reached out into other platforms. Like I haven't even messed with it. I need to at some point. I will, but yeah, Twitter's my primo number one.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the same, branch out. I'm posting stuff, but not as much traction yet as Twitter. I don't know, man. I love Twitter. It works really well for what I think each of us do. So,
Yeah,
um,
and just a little note on that. Like a lot of people worry about owning a platform and like going all in on one thing. But if you've built an audience on Twitter, you can still build in security by moving the community off of Twitter, right? And you can create, spaces for those people to get additional value, whether that's email or, a group in Discord or Telegram or whatever. And now you own that space, and it adds a lot of security for you in that type of business. So if something were to happen, the worst were to take place, you got banned from Twitter or it imploded, you at least have an audience that you can continue working with until you grow somewhere else.
yeah, I want to bring this up just because it's like top of mind, and we're talking about worst case scenario got banned. You use Tweet Hunter?
I did, yeah, yep,
You saw what had happened to them? I think just this morning or something. I mean, I don't know what the
yeah.
this final thing, but man, I had
That's
to check out
brutal.
Hype Fury.
I know.
Yeah,
And here's the thing, like I know some guys that are huge that don't use any schedulers at all, right? They don't mess with that stuff at all. Everything they tweet like right from their phone, and they've got 400, 500,000 followers. And I asked them like, why don't you use one of the schedulers? And they're like, what's the value to me? I tweet only a couple times a day. It's not that hard for me to just jump in there and retweet it if I want to, or whatever. It's like, what's the point? Like, where's my value? And I thought that was really interesting because I was putting a lot of faith in tools and like scheduling processes. And he's like, dude, I run this, $1 million business out of a Google sheet and my Twitter app. He's like, I don't need anything else. Why complicate it? So I
yeah,
thought that was pretty interesting.
yeah. No, it's funny. Like some people despise, and then some people like live and breathe by it.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
multiple ways to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
But
For me, I think that it's consistency. If whichever side you need to be on to be consistent, I think that's the key.
yeah, true. Well, just over an hour here. Want to make sure we keep it prompt for the audience. But as far as your services, how you can help people, where they can find you, all that stuff, what would you like to share?
Yeah. So easiest way to get in contact with me on Twitter, Andrew Strohm, Strohm, and you'll see my shining face. Just send me a DM, reach out, let me know you heard me on here, and I'd love to work with you. Specifically, if you are an offer owner, you're a entrepreneur, solopreneur, you're a coach, consultant, agency owner, whatever. I can help you significantly increase the number of deals that you close based on um, your prospects. And then if you've got a larger business with a sales team, I can help you optimize that team and increase your closure up to 20%, which can obviously have a massive impact when it comes to volume. So reach back
Yeah,
out to me on Twitter, Andrew Strohm, and I'd love to further the conversation.
awesome. Yeah, I've for anyone listening who that is applicable to, I've worked with a team that used his services. They had nothing but amazing things to say. I think they had some um, pretty significant results come on the back end of it. So yeah, reach out to him. But Andy, I appreciate you hopping on. I'm gonna link all your stuff below. If you have links, I'll get them from you, and then we'll send people your way. But thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, Dylan. Appreciate it, man.
All right, take care.